No matter how many times I talk about jointers on this channel, I get the same questions from confused viewers. First, they want to know why Americans call it a jointer when everyone else in the world calls it a planer. Is it just another example of us trying to be jerks? But the most concerning emails I get are from folks who spend a lot of money on one of these machines, often because a woodworking magazine or someone on YouTube said that they needed one. And to their horror, they discover that a jointer does not work as they thought it would. If you think that these machines will make your boards straight, square, and smooth, as everyone seems to claim, you may be in for a big surprise, one that might end up costing you hundreds or even thousands of dollars more just to get the simple results you thought you would get with one machine. First things first, why do Americans call it a jointer instead of a planer? Well, it's because we call this a planer instead. Both these machines plane wood in that they remove material from uneven surfaces to create flat surfaces, or planes. But calling them both planers would just be confusing. So we had to change the name of one of them. In Europe, they decided to call this a thicknesser because one of its primary uses is to change the thickness of boards. And that's all well and good. But we decided to just keep calling that a planer and instead change the name of the other machine. But why jointer? Well, it's because one of its primary uses is to create straight, square edges for the joints required when gluing up panels from multiple narrow boards. It creates joints, so we call it a jointer. It's really a potato-potato thing, but it's not nearly as confusing as the actual purpose of a jointer. Many people buy them because they want to take rough boards that might be slightly warped or cupped, and they want to mill them into nice, straight, square rectangles with 4 flat, parallel surfaces and 4 90-degree corners, the type of boards needed to assemble wooden projects. But the frustrating truth is that this machine, which may cost you hundreds or even thousands of dollars, can only do half of the job. If you buy one, you will also need 2 more equally expensive machines, 3 machines to do one thing: make a nice straight rectangle with 4 flat parallel surfaces and 4 90-degree corners. Is this the biggest ripoff in all of woodworking? A machine that can only do half the job people buy it to do? Well, it might be, if you're not properly informed before you buy. So listen carefully, because I've gone over this a couple times in the past, and some people always have a hard time wrapping their heads around what I'm saying. A jointer can absolutely be used to make a surface flat. It can even be used to make one surface square to another. But it cannot be used to make 2 surfaces parallel to one another, and therefore it's impossible to create a rectangle. Let me illustrate what I mean. Imagine you start with a board that looks like this when viewing it from the end. Each corner is at a different angle because wood moves and warps as it dries, and you need to fix it before you can use it. So you take it to your jointer, and you start by flattening just one face. Now, you can use that newly flattened face as a reference surface, placing it against the jointer's fence as you straighten the edge. That edge is now 90 degrees to the original reference face, and you've created one square corner. Everything's going well so far. So, you flip the board end for end, keeping the same flat reference face against your fence, with the idea that you will now straighten the other edge and create a second 90-degree corner. Of course, when you reverse the direction of a board, you also reverse the direction of the wood grain, and now you might get a bunch of tear out because you're cutting against the grain, but technically you should get 2 90-degree corners and you're well on your way to a perfect rectangle. But here's where you hit a wall. How do you mill the last face so that the other 2 corners are also 90 degrees? You can't put that final face just down and plane it flat, because that won't change its angle in relation to the corners. To square it to an edge, you would have to use one of the edges as a reference surface against your fence. But how are you going to do that with gravity working against you? Even with a relatively small board, it would be difficult to keep that edge against the fence and the surface suspended as the cutter changes its angle one pass at a time. Gravity is going to be working against you. It's just not going to work. But that's not the only problem. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you did the impossible. You held that narrow edge against the fence while planing the last surface square to it. Then, looking at the end of the board, your corners may all be square. But looking down its length, it is very unlikely that the faces or even the edges will be parallel to each other. This is because a jointer cuts whatever portion of the board is touching the table. If the board is cupped or warped, not all of it will be touching the jointer table during the first few passes. That means some parts of the board surface will be shaved away more than other parts until the entire surface of the board becomes as flat as the bed of the jointer. The result is likely to be that the board is slightly wedge-shaped, thinner along one edge than the other, or thicker at one end than the other. If you flip the board over, the jointer will treat the opposite face independently of the one you just flattened. It will make it flat as well, but it cannot make the two faces parallel. The same is true with the edges. It can make them straight, but it cannot make them parallel to one another. This is hard for people to understand because they imagine a jointer shaving off an even slice with each pass. That may technically be possible if the board is already perfect, straight, and smooth. But jointers are rarely used with perfect stock. They're used to mill rough stock, and that's why you must use a jointer in conjunction with other machines. So, you'll use a jointer to flatten one face and to straighten one edge. Then you'll run the board through a thickness planer to bring the second face parallel to the jointed face and therefore square to the one edge. And finally, you'll run it through a table saw to cut the final edge parallel to the jointed edge and to square your two faces. That's how you get 4 flat, straight, square sides on a board with a jointer, a thickness planer, and a table saw. 3 machines to do one job. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And there are some tricks out there. For example, I have a tutorial about how to straighten and square edges with a table saw instead of a jointer. I'll link to it below this video. Some may have also made sleds with adjustable wedges to flatten the surfaces of boards with a thickness planer or with a router. For many smaller projects that don't require a lot of milling, you can technically just eliminate the jointer from the equation and save yourself a lot of money in shop space. But if you mill more than just a few small boards here and there, you'll find the 3-machine process, jointer, thickness planer, and table saw, may seem like a lot, but it's actually faster and simpler than it sounds. Now here's a way to make your jointer and thickness planer work a whole lot better. I may plane some of my things by hand, but I do the bulk of my milling with machines. And I upgraded those machines, particularly my jointer and planer, to helical cutter heads years ago, and it completely changed how the tools work. They're quieter, dust collection is better, the surfaces are smoother and they're free from lines and tear out, even in really difficult wood. Honestly, it may be the best investment I've made in a long time. So if you want an aftermarket head for your older machine, you should consider pulling the trigger now. And you definitely should do it at mywoodcutters.com. They're a small Canadian business that deals with Bird Shelix and Titan Lux cut heads. These are the best ones out there in my opinion. I got my first head from My Woodcutters, I don't even know how many years ago. And since then, I've put in half a dozen of them in different machines. I trust Stefan and his team because they know their stuff. They can walk you through choosing the right head. They can help you to get measurements if they need to manufacture a head for an odd tool. They can help you with making the actual upgrade in your machine, and they don't disappear if you need their help down the road, something that unfortunately seems common when you buy from another source. I wouldn't consider anywhere else for a substantial purchase like this. If you want to check out what a helical carbide cutter head will cost for your jointer or planer, use the link below this video and tell mywoodcutters.com that I sent you. See you next time.